Shalom. He says, Yair Davidiy speaking to you from the land of Israel. Present talk concerns the Jewish people, state of Israel, peoples in the West, peoples from lost end tribes who are now amongst Western nations and are not on the whole aware of their Israelite origins. And they too are a part of this conflict against wicked Arabs and others who want the destruction of Western civilization and want the destruction of the Jewish people. We have a common enemy. We have more than a common enemy. We have a common ancestry. Now we are about to discuss the present ongoing conflict with Hamas and Gaza and its implications. And we are using a report from Al Jazeera, a program, an anti-Israel program that they use to project their ideas, to give over their propaganda against Israel. We're using that as a framework on which to give us a framework in which to present our side of the story and to refute false allegations that the enemy is concocting against us day by day. This article follows, in part, a program that was presented by Al Jazeera, and they have made mistakes, inaccuracies, blatant mistruths, exaggerations, and stated matters as if they were factual, when in fact they are not factual, they are false, and they made errors that a schoolboy would not, and that a well-read schoolboy would not have been guilty of. They have millions of dollars, billions of dollars. They are funded in part by the Qatar government, and there's compared to us, their funds are almost limitless. And they present speakers, some of whom presumably have an academic background, or at least talkers if they have, seem to be presented as such. And the presentation is technically seems to be of quite a high quality. So why couldn't they pay someone who has read a little bit of history just to watch what they are saying, just to read the text of their enunciations, because they have said things that are entirely wrong, that are the opposite of the truth, and in some cases they have no benefit. They seem to have no benefit from this. They are merely exhibiting their ignorance, their lack of reading sufficient background information to have the authority to say the things that they are saying. So that is another point, but it's worth mentioning. We could have hired someone, even someone at a first-year university student level or even lower, to go over what they have said and where they made errors to correct them. Why they did not do this, I don't know. That is their problem. So the narrative, the narrative of the Hamas, of the Hamas spokesman or would-be spokesman from Qatar, Al Jazeera, said that Israel won the West and became to occupy such a privileged and protected place in the Western world and that this says that Israel has won the West and has come to occupy a privileged and protected place in the Western world. And the Jewish people, the story of the Jewish people runs from biblical stories of origin through centuries of persecution and the advent of Zionism, all the way to the creation of Israel and its ensuing occupation of the Palestinian territory. The Jews went from being despised by early Christians as Christ killers, seeding a wild anti-Judaism that would mutate into anti-Semitism, to being considered part of the white Western world. Suddenly they don't like white people. Suddenly something wrong with being white. We don't care one way or the other, but we don't see anything wrong with being part of the white Western world. If we are sharing our common Judeo-Christian heritage. Okay, fair enough. Our common Judeo-Christian heritage. Film lays bare, they say, the film lays bare the alignment of Zionism and Western civilization, deliberately putting in opposition the people of the East, Arabs, Muslims. So maybe we are in opposition to the peoples of the East, to Arabs, to Muslims. Arabs, Muslims, they take the attitude that history began with them, that they are the truth, and anything that was said before them, that came before them, that does not agree with them, is not true. And they are the beginning and the end of everything that is worth existing. And their doctrine as exposed as promoted by Hamas, but consistent with most of them, most of the people who are Qatar in control, is that ultimately Islam should rule over the earth. And if necessary, they will do that by force. For some reason, they consider the Jews to be standing in the way, to be opposed to them. The little Jewish boy, little Jewish minority, is all that is preventing them from world domination, according to them. So that is their problem. That is indeed a problem. That is a problem of theirs. Problem of perceptions that they have. It's not our problem. Also, their narrative is not exact. It's not exactly that way. Anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Semitism existed in the Christian world from the beginning or near the beginning, and has continued right up unto our time. But there were also times, periods, when it was not so bad as all that. There were periods when it was benign, and periods when it was less benign. And there is Christians and Christians, and even as Muslims and Muslims, though the difference is not so great. Amongst the Christians, we have Catholics, and we have Protestants, and we have others. So the early Christianity was mainly Catholic. It's often anti-Jewish and anti-Jewish aspects of it, at least at the beginning. But each country dealt with it in its own way. Ireland, we studied Irish history a little. So our impression is that Irish Catholicism, Irish Christianity, that is Celtic Christianity, also including that of Scotland, the Wales, was then Britain, Celtic Britain, they were not anti-Jewish. In fact, according to the legends, they considered themselves to be brothers of the Jews, belonged to the same family as the Jews, or having ancient connections with the Jews. Does not mean they wanted them as neighbors, but they, at least in the relatively relevant literature, considered themselves as close to the Jews. And at the beginning, their practices were considered Judaic by other people. Later it changed and became more mainstream. But it was a period like that. And even after that, it was different from one country to another. In France, sometimes they were very anti-Semitic, very anti-Jewish, and other times they weren't. Also in France, there was a problem even when France stopped being Christian or stopped being as Christian as it had been, it was still anti-Semitic. There was a case of the Dreyfus affair, 1894 to 1906, when a French officer, actually he was Jewish, but he was also right-wing, even reactionary by our standards, very prim and proper, a great French patriot named Alfred Dreyfus, who was falsely accused of spying for Germany. And at first, may have been a genuine mistake, but even after they realized this mistake, they did not retract, but they kept on maintaining that he had indeed done what they accused him of doing, and they were punishing him for it. Whereas all the world was seeing what was happening and were criticizing them for it. Even anti-Semites were criticizing them for it. Even anti-Semites in Britain considered how Dreyfus was being treated by the French authorities as evidence of French cultural inferiority as compared to the British. Eventually, at all events, the whole truth was revealed, and Dreyfus was officially, first he was released from his punishment, later he was officially fully exonerated. But meanwhile, he had suffered, and so had his family, and so had the Jewish people. But that was an exception to some degree. On the other hand, we also had the Protestants in the West, in England and the Netherlands. They were, relatively speaking, friendly to the Jews. And this applies both to the mainstream Anglican Church, Anglican type evangelical church, and also to the Puritans, to the extremists, so-called extremists, who were often pro-Jewish, adopted Jewish customs, Jewish attitudes. And one of their major leaders, Oliver Cromwell, in the 1600s, he spoke of establishing a kingdom in the Holy Land for the Jews, where the Jews could be independent. And this attitude was shared by others, and he himself believed that the English people were part of lost ten tribes, and so did some of his major followers. So this is what we have. There's a pro-Jewish element that was in favor of helping the Jews, also considered itself to be part of the Hebrew peoples. Now, when Benjamin Disraeli in the 1800s, he had actually technically been born Jewish, but as a child, his parents had converted to Christianity, to the English church, and they brought all their children with them. So he too was also converted to Christianity. He was brought up a Christian. But nevertheless, he espoused a pro-Zionist ideology. He believed that the Jews should have their own country in the Holy Land, and that well-meaning Christians in Britain and elsewhere should help the Jews obtain that. He was an early Zionist, one could say, or an early Christian Zionist. Eventually, he twice served as Prime Minister of Britain, and he was a confidant and the chief advisor of Queen Victoria. And he was an independent thinker in his own right, and quite a personage. And due to him and others like him, support for Zionism became the thing amongst certain classes in Britain, members of the upper class, members of the middle classes, educated people, religious Christians, and they were a minority, but they helped. The influence grew over the years, and eventually they helped bring the state of Israel into fruition in the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Now, the narrative, this Al Jazeera narrative that we're quoting from, or that we used as a framework on which to present what we have to say, it says that the foundations for an Israel where Arab Jews would be marginalized and European Ashkenazi Jews would dominate and go on to become the bedrock of support for right-wing governments and ultra-right nationalists. So it is presenting it as this had been the intention all along, and that is not the case. There's not been the intention of anyone, but things happen. Things happen through historical processes, through objective reality. Ashkenazi Jews, in the beginning, they were the majority. First of all, they were the majority amongst the early settlers. Later, many more people. There were also Eastern Jews there. Later, many more Eastern Jews came, but at the beginning, the majority were Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi were also often fairly well educated and informed. And ideologically motivated. The Mizrahi Jews, that is Jews from the East, came later, and attempts were made to westernize them. In order to survive, they needed to be westernized, but this westernization mistakenly, deliberately weakened their religious traditions in attempts to Europeanize them. And the objective reality facilitated this. Nevertheless, a process of westernization that would have taken place anyway, no matter what happened. I was once with a group of religious Jews in a synagogue on a Sabbath night, when sitting around talking, and these people were quite well informed, and they started to complain about how the secular Israelis, secular Jewish Israelis, were having a negative influence upon the Mizrahi Jews and making them less religious and causing problems. So one of them observed that all this might be true, there might be something in it, but the most serious problem was not the negative intention of any one group, but rather the objective reality that these people had been exposed to Western civilization and they had given into it. And this was a part of the forces that was nothing much to do against them at the time. So that was an opinion. The process of westernization would have taken place no matter what. And despite the above and Mizrahi Jews, the Eastern Jews, indeed, albeit led by an Ashkenazi minority, but mainly Eastern Jews, and they became the bedrock of support for right-wing governments and ultra-right nationalists. The right-wing forces in Israel have come to power and remained in power very much thanks to the Eastern Jews who have supported them. The majority of Eastern Jews, despite everything, are basically loyal to Jewish tradition and to Jewish nationalist patriotic sentiments. One of them was quoted as saying, "We know the Arabs, we live with the Arabs. The Ashkenazi did not. We speak the same language as the Arabs. Let us deal with the Arabs. We know how to deal with them." So the Al Jazeera narrative says the opposite. It blames the Ashkenazis for turning the Israeli public against the Arabs. This is not true. This is just the opposite is the truth.